Massage girl realizes her client is the Mafia boss. Touch it again. Slower. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. It was a typical Wednesday evening, the kind of night where nothing extraordinary is expected. The spa was quiet, with soft music playing in the background and the faint smell of lavender and eucalyptus filling the air. Claire, a young massage therapist, had just finished her shift and was getting ready to leave when the door opened. She looked up, ready to greet the usual tired office workers or the occasional rich tourist who came for a quick relaxation. But this man, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, with an air of authority around him, was different. His presence was commanding, and the second he walked in, the atmosphere of the room shifted. She could feel his eyes on her, cold, calculating, as if he was observing every move she made. Claire forced a smile, trying to hide the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. "Good evening. How can I help you?" she asked, her voice professional, but with a slight tremor she couldn't hide. "I'd like a massage," the man replied, his voice low and firm, with an accent that hinted at a foreign origin. His eyes never left her, making her uncomfortable, but she didn't show it. She led him to one of the private rooms, her mind racing with the subtle tension in the air. This man wasn't like the others. As she instructed him to lie on the table, she could see the muscles in his back, tense as if he was always on alert. The room felt small and suffocating as she began the massage, her hands moving across his back with practiced precision. But the man didn't relax. Instead, he seemed to be studying her, his gaze sharp, unblinking. Claire tried to ignore the feeling, focusing on her technique. But then, without warning, he spoke again. "Touch it again. Slower." The words were simple, but they sent a jolt through her body. There was something about the way he said it, a command in his tone that made her heart race. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. The tension in the room thickened as she adjusted her movements, trying to comply with his demand. As her hands moved slower across his back, she noticed the muscles beneath her touch were not only tense, but almost rigid, like a coiled spring waiting to snap. A part of her wanted to pull back, to walk out of the room and never look back. But she needed this job. She couldn't afford to lose it. And then, just as she was about to finish, the man turned his head slightly, catching her eye. "You know, you've been very good so far," he said, his voice still calm. But there was a weight to it, something that made her stomach twist. "But I have a feeling you're hiding something." Claire froze, her breath catching in her throat. What did he mean by that? She wasn't hiding anything, was she? Her mind raced, but she couldn't think straight. There was something about this man, something she couldn't quite place, but it made her nervous. As she finished the session, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just crossed paths with someone dangerous. Little did she know, her encounter with this man would change her life forever. Massage girl realizes her client is the Mafia boss. Touch it again. Slower. After the session ended, Claire stepped back, trying to hide the unease that had settled in her chest. She cleaned the table, wiping down the surface slowly, still feeling the weight of the man's gaze on her. Her mind raced with questions. Who was he really? What did he want from her? She had been massaging clients for years, but this was different. There was something about him that didn't add up, something that made her skin crawl. As she placed the towels neatly on the counter, she noticed him standing by the door, his presence still commanding the space. "You did well," he said, his voice calm and steady. She forced a smile, trying to sound professional, though her heart was still pounding. "Thank you, sir. It's my job." He stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as if studying her every movement. "It's not just a job, Claire. You're good at it." Claire blinked, confused by his comment. How did he know her name? She hadn't told him. "How do you know my name?" she asked, a nervous edge creeping into her voice. He didn't answer right away, instead pulling a business card from his suit pocket and sliding it across the counter toward her. "I know more about you than you think," he said, his tone still measured. She stared at the card for a moment before picking it up. The name on it was unfamiliar, but it had a certain air of authority about it. She looked up, about to ask him what he meant, when he continued. I'm offering you something, he said, his voice low, as though he were speaking to her in confidence. Claire felt her stomach tighten. What was he offering? Money? Power? She wasn't sure, but there was something unsettling about his words. I don't need anything, she said, her voice firm despite the fear creeping up her spine. I'm just here to work. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It's not about what you need, Claire. It's about what I can offer you. Something bigger than this. His hand moved towards the door, but before he left, he turned back to face her. I'll be in touch. You'll see. And just like that, he was gone. Claire stood there for a moment, the weight of the encounter pressing down on her. She hadn't known what to expect when she started working at the spa, but she was certain of one thing now. Her life was about to change. The man had said he'd be in touch, and she had no idea what that meant, but the ominous tone of his voice left her uneasy. She wasn't sure why, but a part of her felt like she had just entered a world far darker than she had ever imagined. The next few days passed in a blur of routine, but Claire couldn't shake the memory of the man. Every time she looked at her phone, she half expected a call or a message, but nothing came. She started to convince herself that maybe she had overreacted. Maybe he had just been another arrogant, rich customer who thought he could intimidate her with his presence. She almost convinced herself that nothing would happen. That was, until she received an unexpected call. 2 days later, the voice on the other end was smooth, familiar. It was him. Claire, he said, his tone as calm as ever. It's time. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Time for what? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. For you to come with me, he replied. You're coming to work for me. No more playing games. Claire froze, every instinct in her body telling her to say no, to hang up the phone and run as far away as she could. But she couldn't. She was already in too deep. I don't want any part of whatever it is you're doing, she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound confident. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he spoke again, his voice almost teasing. You're already part of it, Claire. You just don't know it yet. Her heart pounded in her chest, panic rising within her. I don't know what you mean. Please leave me alone. He chuckled softly, the sound sending a shiver down her spine. I'm afraid that's not possible. You've crossed a line, Claire, and now you belong to me. His words were a cold promise, one that made her blood run cold. She wanted to hang up. She wanted to run. But something deep inside told her that it was already too late. She was already tangled up in his web, and there was no escaping it now. Massage girl realizes her client is the Mafia boss. Touch it again. Slower. The next few days felt like a blur to Claire. She tried to push the events of the other night out of her mind, focusing on her usual routine at the spa. But no matter how hard she tried, the thought of that man, the Mafia boss, haunted her every waking moment. She couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken a dark turn. Her phone buzzed in the middle of her shift. It was a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated before answering. Hello? She asked, her voice betraying the anxiety she felt. Claire, came the smooth, familiar voice from the other end of the line. It's time. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to call so soon, but now that he had, she knew she couldn't avoid it any longer. What do you want from me? She asked, trying to keep the tremble out of her voice. I want you to come work for me, he replied. His tone was calm, almost reassuring, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. You'll be well taken care of. No more working here. I'll take care of everything. Claire's mind raced. She wanted to refuse, to hang up and pretend this never happened. But the thought of the power he held, the things he could do to her if she refused, kept her rooted in place. I can't just leave my life behind, she stammered. You already have, Claire, he said, his voice firm but not unkind. You just don't know it yet. I'll send a car for you in an hour. You don't have a choice. Claire's pulse raced. She wanted to say no, to stand her ground, but the words stuck in her throat. The fear of what he might do if she refused kept her silent. Fine, she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. I'll be ready. The call ended abruptly, and Claire was left standing there, feeling more uncertain than ever. She knew this was a dangerous game, but she had no idea how deep it ran. The thought of being tied to a Mafia boss, caught up in his world, made her stomach churn. But what other choice did she have? The hour passed in a daze. Claire packed her things, her hands shaking as she gathered her coat and bag. She looked around the small spa, the place that had been her refuge for so long, and realized that stepping into this new world meant leaving it all behind. There was no going back. When the car arrived, Claire felt as though she was walking into the unknown. The driver, a tall man in a dark suit, opened the door for her without a word. He didn't need to speak. The silence between them was thick, filled with unspoken understanding. Claire slid into the back seat, trying to steady her breath as the car pulled away. The city passed by in a blur of lights and shadows, but all Claire could focus on was the unsettling feeling growing in her chest. She was in way over her head. The car eventually stopped in front of a large, imposing building, its dark windows reflecting the streetlights like mirrors. Claire hesitated for a moment, but the driver didn't wait. He simply opened the door and motioned for her to get out. She followed him through a set of double doors, her footsteps echoing in the silent hallway. The air felt heavier here, thicker, as if every inch of the space was infused with power. At the end of the hallway, a man stood waiting for her. It was him, the Mafia boss, Aleandro Romano. His presence filled the room, his dark eyes locking onto hers the second she stepped inside. "Welcome to my world, Claire," he said, his voice smooth and authoritative. "I've been waiting for you." Claire's heart raced, but she held her ground. She wasn't sure if it was fear or defiance that kept her standing, but she wasn't about to let him see how scared she really was. "What is this?" she asked, her voice shaky but determined. "What do you want from me?" Aleandro smiled, but it wasn't a smile of kindness. It was a smile that spoke of control, of power. "I want you to stay. I want you to work for me, to help me with certain matters. You'll be well taken care of, I promise you that." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "And in return, you'll learn more about me than you ever thought possible. You'll see the world as I do, Claire." His words were like a promise, but Claire wasn't sure if it was one she could keep. As he reached out to touch her arm, she recoiled slightly, but he caught her wrist with a firm grip, his touch surprisingly gentle. "You're mine now," he said, his voice low and commanding. "And you'll do what I say." Claire's pulse quickened as he spoke, her mind racing. She had no idea what she had gotten herself into, but she knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back now. Massage girl realizes her client is the Mafia boss. Touch it again. Slower. Claire stood frozen, her wrist still in his grasp. Aleandro Romano's touch was firm, but there was an unsettling gentleness to it, like he was accustomed to holding power but choosing to wield it with restraint. He held her gaze for a long moment, his dark eyes piercing through her, as though he was reading her thoughts. "You're mine now," he repeated, his voice calm, but with an undeniable weight behind it. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened slightly, not painful but unyielding. She swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Aleandro smiled, a slow, almost predatory grin. "It means you're here to stay. In my world, you'll learn things you never thought possible, and you'll do things you never imagined." Claire's stomach churned at his words, but she couldn't deny the intrigue they stirred in her. A part of her was terrified, but another part, the part that had always longed for something more than the mundane life she had been leading, felt strangely drawn to him. He let go of her wrist and stepped back, giving her some space, but his presence still dominated the room. "Follow me," he said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth, as if everything he said was part of a plan she didn't yet understand. Claire hesitated for a moment before nodding, unsure of what else to do. She followed him through a series of hallways, her footsteps echoing against the cold marble floors. The mansion was unlike anything she had ever seen before, immense, luxurious, and eerily quiet. The walls were adorned with expensive art, and the furniture was all sleek and modern, yet somehow old-fashioned in its opulence. It felt like walking through a palace, a place that wasn't meant for someone like her. They entered a large room at the back of the mansion. A long, polished wooden table sat in the center, surrounded by leather chairs. At one end of the table sat a man Claire hadn't seen before, tall, broad-shouldered, with a commanding presence that matched Aleandro's. His sharp eyes flicked over to Claire as they entered, his gaze assessing but not unfriendly. Aleandro motioned for her to sit down across from the man. "This is Luca," Aleandro said, his tone casual, But there was something in the way he said the name that made Claire feel like there was more to this meeting than she realized. Luca didn't speak immediately. Instead, he studied Claire for a moment, his gaze unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice deep but strangely calm. Aleandro has told me about you. Claire's breath caught in her throat. What did he tell you? She asked, her voice trembling. Luca's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. That you're special, he replied, his words sending a shiver down her spine. And that you have a role to play in this family's business. Claire blinked, confused and alarmed. I don't understand, she said, shaking her head. What do you mean, a role to play? Aleandro sat down next to Luca, his eyes never leaving Claire. I mean exactly what I said, he said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. You've been brought into this world for a reason, Claire. And now, you're part of it. There's no going back. Claire's heart raced, her mind spinning with the implications of his words. She had no idea what she had gotten herself into. This wasn't just a job offer. It was something far darker, far more dangerous. I didn't sign up for this, she said, her voice rising in frustration. I just want to leave. I want to go back to my life. Aleandro's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, amusement, perhaps. Your life isn't here anymore, he said, his words final. You belong to us now. Claire's stomach twisted as the weight of his words settled over her. She had known, deep down, that she was in too deep to turn back. But hearing it spoken so plainly, so coldly, made it feel real in a way she hadn't anticipated. She had no idea what was coming next, but one thing was certain. There was no escaping this world now. She was inextricably tied to Aleandro Romano and his Mafia. And no matter how much she wanted to run, no matter how much she resisted, she was beginning to realize that she had already become part of their world. A world that was far darker, far more dangerous than anything she had ever imagined. Massage girl realizes her client is the Mafia boss. Touch it again. Slower. The days that followed were a blur of strange meetings and unsettling revelations. Claire couldn't shake the feeling that every move she made was being watched. Every word she said weighed and measured. Aleandro kept his distance, but his presence was always felt. He'd sent her to a lavish apartment in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, a place that screamed wealth and power at every turn. It wasn't just an apartment, it was a fortress. Marble floors, grand chandeliers, and walls adorned with paintings that must have cost more than Claire would ever make in a lifetime. The apartment was full of luxury, but it was also empty, cold. She had everything she could ever want, but she felt trapped. Her only purpose now, as far as she could tell, was to wait for Aleandro's instructions. Every time the phone rang, her heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what he would want next, but she had learned by now that defying him was not an option. She had learned that the hard way after her first few attempts to leave the building. Each time, Aleandro's men had been right there, as if they had known exactly where she was at every moment. He had put her in this cage, and there was no way out. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of waiting, the phone finally rang again. Claire's hand trembled as she reached for it, the same familiar dread creeping up her spine. It's time, Aleandro's voice said on the other end, as calm and composed as ever. You have a job to do. Claire closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath. What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You'll find out soon enough, Aleandro replied, his tone carrying an undertone of something more, something dangerous. I'll send someone to pick you up. Don't make me wait. The call ended abruptly, and Claire felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had no idea what this job was, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. She dressed quickly, slipping into a simple but elegant black dress, the kind that could pass for expensive without drawing too much attention. As she waited for the car to arrive, she couldn't help but wonder how much deeper into this world she would be dragged. When the car finally arrived, it was just as sleek and black as every other car Aleandro had sent for her. The driver didn't speak, simply opening the door for her and waiting for her to get in. Claire climbed in, trying to ignore the anxiety swirling in her stomach. The drive was long, and the city passed by in a blur of lights and shadows. When they finally arrived, it wasn't at a location Claire recognized. It was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place you only saw in movies about criminal enterprises. The car stopped, and the driver didn't wait for her to get out. He simply opened the door, motioning for her to follow. She stepped out, her heart pounding in her chest. The place was deserted, or at least it seemed that way. The air was thick with tension, and the only sound was the distant hum of traffic. They entered the warehouse, and Claire's breath caught in her throat. At the far end of the room, there were men standing in a circle. Aleandro was there, his dark eyes scanning the room, always watching. And next to him was Luca, the man who had been so cold to her when they first met. He was standing in front of a man tied to a chair, his face bruised and bloodied. The man was trembling, his eyes wide with fear as he looked at Luca. "What's going on?" Claire asked, her voice shaking. Aleandro turned to her, a slight smile on his lips. "You're here to help me settle a debt," he said simply, as though the whole situation were just another part of the business. Claire felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean?" she asked, stepping back slightly. "You need to make sure this man understands the consequences of crossing me," Aleandro said, his voice smooth and unbothered. "You'll help Luca get the information we need." Claire's mind raced, and for the first time since she had entered this world, she thought about running. But she knew she couldn't. There was nowhere to run. She was already too deep. She looked at Luca, who gave her a sharp nod. He had become someone different since she first met him. Harder, colder, just like Aleandro. Claire stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what she had to do, even if it made her sick. She had no choice. She wasn't just in this world now. She was part of it. Massage girl realizes her client is the Mafia boss. Touch it again. Slower. The air in the warehouse was thick with tension, and Claire could feel it weighing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. The man in the chair before her was shaking, blood dripping down his face as he stared at Luca with fear in his eyes. Luca, standing tall and cold, turned his gaze to Claire, silently motioning for her to step forward. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to run, to get out of this place, but her legs wouldn't move. She was frozen, stuck in a nightmare she never asked for, a nightmare that now felt like it was closing in on her. Aleandro stood by, his presence as commanding as ever, his eyes sharp and calculating. He watched Claire closely, waiting for her reaction. "You know what to do?" Aleandro's voice broke the silence. It was calm, almost detached, as if he had seen this 100 times before. "Help Luca get what we need from him." Claire's mind raced, her thoughts a jumbled mess. She didn't know how she got here or what she was supposed to do, but the look on Luca's face, cold, unreadable, told her that there would be no backing out now. She glanced at the man in the chair, his eyes wide with terror, his body shaking from more than just the cold. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Please, don't do this. I'll tell you whatever you want. Just don't hurt me anymore." Claire felt a pang of guilt. She didn't want to be part of this. She didn't want to hurt anyone, but the reality of her situation was sinking in. She was part of this world now, and there was no turning back. Lucas stepped forward, his face emotionless as he grabbed the man by the collar, lifting him slightly off the chair. "You'll talk," Lucas said, his voice low and dangerous. "One way or another." Claire swallowed hard, her throat dry. Her hand trembled as she reached for the bag next to her, the bag Aleandro had instructed her to carry when she arrived. It felt heavier than ever, its contents unknown to her. What was in it? What was she supposed to do with it? The questions spun in her mind, but there was no time to answer them. Luca's gaze flicked to her, urging her to move. "Now," he said. Reluctantly, Claire opened the bag. Inside were various tools, none of which she recognized, but there was one object that caught her attention, a syringe. She stared at it for a moment, her heart hammering in her chest. "What was this for?" "What's in this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, though the words felt like a scream in her ears. Aleandro's cold eyes met hers, and for the first time since she entered this world, she saw something in his expression, something darker. "Don't worry about it," he said, his voice smooth but full of threat. "You'll use it. You'll help Luca." Claire's hand shook as she lifted the syringe, the metal tip catching the dim light. Her mind screamed for her to put it down, to run, but she couldn't. Her body had already betrayed her, already chosen this path. She turned back to the man in the chair, his pleading eyes locked on hers. "Please, please don't hurt me," he begged, his voice cracked with fear. Claire felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat, but she pushed it down. She wasn't the one hurting him. It was Luca. It was Aleandro. She was just following orders. With trembling hands, Claire injected the syringe into the man's arm, her heart pounding in her chest. It was over in seconds. The man slumped back in his chair, his body limp as the drug took effect. "He'll talk now," Luca said, his voice devoid of any sympathy. "What is he supposed to tell you?" Claire whispered, her voice barely audible. "Everything," Luca replied coldly. "We need information, and you're going to help us get it." Aleandro stepped forward, his eyes still locked on Claire. "You've done well, Claire," he said, his voice unexpectedly warm. "You're learning quickly. You'll make a good addition to our operations." Claire wanted to scream, wanted to run, but instead, she nodded. What else could she do? She had already crossed the line. There was no going back now. She was in this world for good. As she stood there, watching the man in the chair, still unconscious and now completely at their mercy, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. She was part of something much darker than she ever imagined, and no matter how much she wanted out, there was no way to escape. Aleandro's world had claimed her, and there was no escaping its grasp. Massage girl realizes her client is the Mafia boss. Touch it again. Slower. The days blurred together for Claire after the incident in the warehouse. Each morning, she awoke in the luxurious apartment Aleandro had set her up in, the walls adorned with priceless artwork, and the view of the city stretching far and wide before her. But there was nothing beautiful about it. She was trapped, and the mansion, the penthouse, it all felt more like a gilded cage. Aleandro kept his word. He never pushed her too hard, not in the way she expected. Instead, he gave her tasks, small things at first. Observing meetings, being present at events, keeping her distance, but always watching, always assessing. And with every passing day, the feeling that she was slipping deeper into his world grew stronger. The real work, though, came when he asked her to accompany him to a private gathering. She didn't know exactly what kind of event it was, but the way Aleandro looked at her, the subtle hint of expectation in his gaze, made it clear she couldn't refuse. When the night came, she dressed in an elegant black dress, the kind of attire that fit perfectly into his world. She didn't feel like herself anymore, not in the mirror, not with every step she took toward the unknown. The car arrived at precisely 7 p.m., just as it always did. The driver didn't speak, only opened the door for her to slide in. The ride was smooth, the city lights flashing past like ghosts. Claire stared out of the window, her reflection the only thing she could focus on. The woman she saw there was a stranger, polished, composed, yet hollow. They arrived at a high-rise building in the heart of the city. As they entered, Claire felt the shift in the air. It was the same sensation she had felt the first night she came here, a thick, heavy presence that seemed to fill every corner. She was escorted into a private elevator, the doors closing behind her with a soft swoosh. When it opened again, they were on the top floor. The space was grand, luxurious, and full of people Claire didn't recognize. There were men and women in designer suits, talking in low voices, exchanging glances that held unspoken secrets. Aleandro led her through the crowd, his hand at the small of her back, guiding her with an air of familiarity. She didn't know who these people were, but they all seemed to know him. The room quieted when they entered, the attention shifting toward Aleandro as if he were royalty. Claire felt small beside him, like a child at a grown-up's table. He spoke with the other guests, his words calm and authoritative, each sentence dripping with the kind of confidence that only power could provide. Claire stood off to the side, a glass of champagne in hand, feeling out of place. The women in the room were all dressed in their finest, their eyes flicking toward her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. She couldn't help but wonder if they saw her as just another piece of Aleandro's puzzle, an accessory in his empire. As the night went on, Claire's anxiety grew. She wanted to leave, wanted to run back to her quiet, lonely apartment, but she knew that was impossible. Aleandro was watching her closely, his eyes never straying too far from her. It was like he could sense her every thought, her every desire to break free. But then, just as she was about to retreat to a quieter corner of the room, a man approached her. He was tall, dark-haired, with a sharp jawline and a face that could have been carved from stone. His presence was intimidating, and his eyes seemed to scrutinize her every move. "You're Claire, right?" he asked, his voice deep and smooth. Claire nodded, her heart racing. Yes, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's lips twitched into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I'm Gabriel, he said, his gaze lingering on her a moment too long. Aleandro has spoken about you. Claire felt her throat tighten. What do you mean? She asked, trying to keep the nerves out of her voice. Gabriel's smile grew slightly. He's taken a special interest in you, he said, his tone laced with something that made her skin crawl. But don't worry. We all have our parts to play. His words sent a chill through her, and she felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat. I don't understand, Claire said, her voice barely audible. Gabriel stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. You will soon enough, he said softly, before walking away, leaving her standing there with her mind spinning. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Claire could barely focus on the conversations around her, her thoughts consumed by Gabriel's cryptic words. What did he mean by taking a special interest? What was she really doing here? And why did Aleandro seem to have a plan? For her that she couldn't see? As the night came to an end, Aleandro finally approached her, his gaze softening when he saw her. Ready to go? He asked, his voice warm but tinged with something darker beneath the surface. Claire nodded, unable to form words, and followed him out of the building. The car ride back to the apartment was silent, but Claire couldn't shake the feeling that things were changing. The life she once knew was slipping away, replaced by a world she didn't belong to, a world she couldn't escape from. She was his now, whether she wanted to be or not, and the thought of what that meant filled her with dread. But as Aleandro glanced at her, there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a hint of something she couldn't quite understand. Was it affection? Or was it something darker? Massage girl realizes her client is the Mafia boss. Touch it again. Slower. The following days felt like a blur for Claire, each one blending into the next with little distinction. She had settled into a strange routine in the apartment Aleandro had provided for her, one that felt more like a holding cell than a home. Her life, once simple and quiet, was now a whirlwind of meetings, whispered conversations, and fleeting moments of solitude. Aleandro's presence was constant, though always just out of reach. He would appear, give her tasks to do, and then disappear again, leaving her to navigate this strange, dark world alone. It was as though he were preparing her for something. But what exactly? She couldn't tell. The mansion, with its polished marble floors and towering windows, felt like a distant dream compared to the grim reality of the work she was now expected to do. She had gone from a massage therapist with a simple life to something much more complicated, a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand. One evening, as she prepared to leave the apartment for yet another unspoken assignment, she received a call from Aleandro. Come to my office, he said, his voice low and commanding. We have a situation to discuss. Claire's stomach twisted. She hadn't seen him in 2 days, and the fact that he was summoning her to his office meant something was about to happen, something that involved her. She dressed quickly, choosing a black dress that was simple, but elegant, and headed out the door. The drive to his office felt longer than usual, her nerves building with each passing minute. As the car pulled up to the building, she could see the silhouette of Aleandro through the glass doors. He was waiting for her. When she entered, he looked up from his desk, his eyes scanning her with that familiar, calculating gaze. Sit, he said, motioning to the chair across from him. Claire obeyed, though she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something she wasn't prepared for. There's a job, Aleandro began, his tone as measured as ever. A delivery that needs to be made, and you're going to help. Claire's heart skipped a beat. A delivery? What did that mean? What kind of delivery? She asked, trying to keep the fear from her voice. Aleandro leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. A simple one, he said. We're moving goods, and I need someone I can trust to make sure the transaction goes smoothly. I don't understand, Claire said, her voice trembling slightly. You've been working with me long enough to know that things don't just go smoothly in this business, Aleandro replied, his lips curling into a faint smile. You'll learn. The people you'll be meeting are dangerous, but you'll be fine. Just do exactly as I say. Claire swallowed, trying to steady her breath. She didn't want to do this. She didn't want to be involved in whatever illegal dealings Aleandro was running. But as always, she had no choice. The moment she stepped into his world, She had signed an unspoken contract to follow his orders, no matter what they were. "When do we leave?" she asked, resigning herself to the inevitable. Aleandro stood up, his movements deliberate. "Soon," he said, walking around the desk to stand in front of her. "But before we go, there's something you need to understand. This isn't just a simple delivery. This is a test. You're being watched." "Watched?" Claire asked, confused. "By whom?" "By my associates," Aleandro said, his voice turning colder. "They're all watching, waiting to see if you're ready for what comes next. You're here because I chose you, Claire, but you need to prove yourself." Claire's stomach churned. She didn't want to be part of his dangerous world, but she didn't have a choice. She had no idea how deep she was in, and no idea what Aleandro expected from her. "What exactly do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Aleandro's eyes softened, just for a moment. "I need you to make the delivery," he said, his tone no longer cold but oddly comforting. "But don't worry. I'll be with you every step of the way." He extended a hand, his fingers brushing against hers as he guided her to her feet. "Tonight is important. Do as I say, and we'll both be fine." Claire nodded, though doubt gnawed at her. She had no idea what she was getting into, but one thing was certain. Aleandro's world wasn't one she could escape from. She was already in too deep, and now, she was about to learn just how far that rabbit hole went. Massage girl realizes her client is the Mafia boss. Touch it again. Slower. The night felt heavier than Claire expected as she stepped into the sleek black car, the cold leather of the seat pressing against her. Aleandro sat across from her, his gaze calm but intense, his presence still as overpowering as ever. The drive was long, filled with the quiet hum of the engine and the faint sound of tires against pavement. Claire couldn't bring herself to speak, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. What had she gotten herself into? What was this test Aleandro had referred to? She glanced at him, his eyes fixed ahead, as though the weight of the world didn't rest on his shoulders at all. "We're going to meet some people tonight," Aleandro said, breaking the silence. "People who don't trust easily. You'll need to prove you're capable." Claire swallowed hard, the lump in her throat growing. "Capable of what?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Of handling yourself. Of dealing with things my way." His voice was steady, but there was something in his words that made her blood run cold. She wasn't sure what his way meant, but she was about to find out. The car pulled up to a nondescript building on the outskirts of the city. The exterior was plain, even run down, but Claire knew better than to judge by appearances. She followed Aleandro inside, her steps tentative, and was immediately hit with the contrast between the building's unkempt appearance and what lay within. The inside was immaculate, with polished floors and minimalistic yet expensive decor. Men in dark suits were scattered around, talking in hushed tones. They all stopped when Aleandro entered, their eyes following him, acknowledging his authority without a word. Claire felt their gaze on her, the tension in the room suddenly thickening. She wasn't sure whether they were looking at her with curiosity or disdain, but she felt like an outsider. She had always been one to blend into the background, but tonight, she was the center of attention, and it made her skin crawl. "Claire." Aleandro's voice brought her back to the moment. He gestured for her to follow him as he approached a table where two men sat. One of them was older, with graying hair and a sharp, calculating look in his eyes. The other was younger, but just as imposing, his expression cold and unreadable. They both stood as Aleandro walked toward them. The older man nodded at Claire, but it was the younger one who spoke first. "This is the one?" he asked, his tone skeptical. "She doesn't look like much." Aleandro's gaze hardened, and for a moment, Claire thought he might reprimand the man. But instead, Aleandro smiled, the gesture chilling in its lack of warmth. "She's more than you think," he said, "and she'll prove it tonight." Claire felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The younger man eyed her again, this time with less skepticism and more interest. "We'll see," he muttered, taking a step back to let Aleandro take the lead. Aleandro motioned for Claire to sit, and she did so reluctantly, trying to keep her composure. The older man spoke again. "We need a delivery made, Aleandro," he said, his voice low and smooth. "A sensitive one. We don't trust just anyone with this." Claire's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just any ordinary job. She had been expecting something less dangerous, something more in line with the tasks Aleandro had given her before. But this was different. Claire will handle it, Aleandro said confidently, turning toward her. She's ready for this. Aren't you, Claire? She swallowed hard, nodding as if she had any choice in the matter. I'm ready, she lied, though every fiber of her being screamed for her to run. The older man didn't seem convinced, but he didn't argue. Fine, he said. We'll see how she does. Aleandro turned to the younger man, his expression darkening. Make sure she's protected. No one gets to her. Understand. The younger man nodded, his eyes narrowing as he took in the situation. Claire felt the weight of the moment bearing down on her. She was about to do something she didn't understand, with people she didn't trust. Aleandro was setting her up, but for what? She wasn't sure. We'll be in touch, the older man said as the conversation came to a close. Aleandro led her out of the room, his steps steady, as though the world around him bent to his will. Claire felt small beside him, her mind spinning. They made their way back to the car, the silence between them almost suffocating. Once inside, Aleandro finally spoke. I told you this wasn't going to be easy, he said, his voice quiet but firm. But you're going to make it. I'll make sure of it. Claire turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. What am I supposed to do? Aleandro met her gaze, his eyes unreadable. You'll find out soon enough. Just remember, you're mine now. And that means you do what I say. She nodded, though fear gripped her heart. There was no escaping now. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Aleandro's world was her world now, and no matter how much she tried to fight it, she was trapped. Massage girl realizes her client is the Mafia boss. Touch it again. Slower. The night air felt colder than usual as Claire stepped out of the car, her heels clicking softly on the pavement. The city lights flickered in the distance, but where she stood was quiet, tucked away from the chaos of downtown. Aleandro had brought her to a small, secluded building on the outskirts of the city, its exterior plain enough to hide the importance of what was inside. This was the place she was supposed to make the delivery. This was the test. Claire tried to steady her breath, but her hands still trembled. Aleandro stood beside her, his posture relaxed yet alert, as if he could sense danger long before it appeared. His gaze drifted to her, and for a moment, his usual cold demeanor softened. Stay close, he said, his voice low and certain. I will not let anything happen to you. Claire nodded, though fear twisted inside her like a tightening knot. She followed him toward the entrance, the dim light casting long shadows across the ground. A man opened the door before they even knocked. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit, and his eyes scanned Claire with a mixture of curiosity and caution. She is the one? The man asked, his tone hard. Aleandro nodded once. She is. They stepped inside, and Claire immediately noticed the quiet hum of tension in the air. The building was more refined than she expected. The front room had polished floors, minimalistic decor, and a few men standing guard. Their silence was unnerving. Claire felt their eyes on her, evaluating her, wondering why she was here. Aleandro placed a reassuring hand on her lower back, guiding her through the room. His touch was steady, grounding, but it did little to calm the storm inside her. Remember what I told you, he whispered as they approached a private office at the back of the building. You speak only when spoken to. And whatever happens, look at me. No one else. Claire gulped and nodded. When they entered the office, a man sat behind a glass desk. He was older, with silver hair and a sharp gaze that dissected everything it landed on. He looked at Claire as if she were a puzzle he was not sure he wanted to solve. So, the man said slowly, this is your new recruit. Claire felt her stomach drop. The word recruit did not sound like a compliment. Aleandro did not flinch. She is here to deliver the package, he replied calmly. The man's gaze shifted from Aleandro to Claire, then to the small black case Aleandro placed on the desk. Open it, he ordered. Claire hesitated, glancing at Aleandro for reassurance. He gave a small nod. She opened the case slowly. Inside were documents, neatly organized and sealed, the kind that looked important enough to shift the balance of power in dangerous ways. Nothing harmful, nothing violent, just information. But Claire understood enough by now to know that information, in Aleandro's world, could be just as dangerous. The man behind the desk studied the documents for several long moments. The silence stretched on, and Claire felt every second crawl along her skin. Finally, the man looked up. It is all here, he said. Good. Very good. Relief washed through Claire so suddenly she almost stumbled. But the moment of ease did not last. The man leaned back in his chair, his gaze settling on her once more. But I have one question, he said slowly. Why her? Aleandro's expression darkened, but his voice remained steady. Because I chose her, he said. And that is all you need to know. The man chuckled under his breath, a sound that made Claire's skin prickle. You always were stubborn, Aleandro. His eyes returned to Claire, sharper now. You realize what it means to be chosen by him, do you not? Claire felt the weight of the question, heavy and suffocating. She wanted to speak, but her throat tightened. Aleandro stepped forward before she could respond. She will learn, he said. In time. The man nodded slowly. Then the deal is done. He closed the case with a snap and slid it back across the desk. You may go. Claire let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. As they exited the building, the cold air hit her face, grounding her once more in reality. The car door closed behind her with a soft thud, and she sank into the seat, her heart still racing. Aleandro sat beside her, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity she could not decipher. You did well, he said quietly. She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. I was terrified. Aleandro leaned in slightly, his tone lower than before. Fear keeps you alive, Claire. But strength, that keeps you by my side. She felt a shiver run through her, not from fear, but from something deeper, something she could not yet name. As the car pulled away, disappearing into the city lights, Claire knew one thing for certain. Tonight had changed everything. And whatever came next, there was no turning back. Massage girl realizes her client is the Mafia boss. Touch it again. Slower. The days following the delivery had been filled with a sense of unsettling calm. Claire stayed in the apartment Aleandro had provided, trying to adjust to the silence that surrounded her. She couldn't escape the feeling that something was always just beyond her reach, something dark that loomed in the shadows of the life Aleandro had pulled her into. The world outside the apartment seemed distant, unreachable, as though she were cut off from everything she had once known. Aleandro had been distant, giving her space, but his presence was still felt in every corner of the apartment, every corner of her mind. She couldn't escape him. Not now. Not ever. The phone rang one afternoon as Claire was sitting by the window, looking out over the city. The sound startled her, pulling her from the trance she had been in. Her heart skipped a beat as she picked it up. It's time. Aleandro's voice came through the receiver, calm as always, yet full of authority. Meet me in the usual place. We have work to do. His words sent a chill down her spine, but she had no choice. This was the life she had now, whether she wanted it or not. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. She quickly dressed, the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. It was as if she could feel the invisible strings pulling her deeper into Aleandro's world, a world that grew darker with every step she took. The drive to the warehouse felt longer than usual. Her mind raced, her thoughts swirling with uncertainty. What was the work this time? What had she become involved in? The city blurred past the windows of the car, but all Claire could focus on was the sense of dread that gnawed at her insides. When they arrived, Aleandro was already waiting for her. He stood in the shadows, his figure tall and imposing against the dim light. There was something about him, something magnetic, that kept pulling her back to him, even as she tried to break free. You're here, he said, his voice a low rumble as she approached. There was no warmth in his greeting, only the cold certainty that whatever was happening next, she would be a part of it. Come inside, he said, motioning toward the open door of the warehouse. Claire hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of oil and metal. The space was dimly lit, the shadows playing tricks on her eyes as she followed Aleandro through the maze of machinery and crates. What's going on? She asked, her voice shaky, but she couldn't stop herself from asking. You'll see. Aleandro replied cryptically, not slowing his pace. You're going to help me with something important tonight. As they reached the far side of the warehouse, Claire could make out the shape of a man standing near a table, his back to them. He turned as they approached, revealing a face Claire didn't recognize, but the look in his eyes was cold, calculating. He was a part of Aleandro's world, and Claire could feel that with every fiber of her being. This is Vincent, Aleandro said, gesturing to the man. He's someone who needs your assistance. Vincent's eyes narrowed as he looked at Claire, sizing her up. There was something about his gaze that made her skin crawl. She had seen this look before. Men who viewed her as nothing more than an object to be used. But she wasn't just anyone. Not anymore. What do you need me to do? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Aleandro's gaze flicked to her, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of something. Perhaps approval, perhaps something darker. You'll help him with the delivery, he said. Claire's stomach lurched. A delivery again? She had done it before, but this time it felt different. But this is more delicate, Aleandro added, his voice lowering. There are people who want to see us fail. You'll need to stay focused, no distractions. Claire nodded, though she felt the weight of the words. This wasn't just another errand. This was a test, just like he had said before. She was being watched, and she needed to prove herself. Let's get this done, Aleandro said, his tone firm. Vincent moved toward a table at the far end of the room, where a large, sealed case sat. The moment Claire saw it, she knew this was different from before. There was an air of finality to it, like the end of something important. Vincent opened the case slowly, revealing a set of documents, stacks of money, and a few small, nondescript items that Claire couldn't quite make out. The client is waiting, Vincent said, his voice sharp. We need to move quickly. Aleandro nodded, motioning for Claire to follow Vincent. As they made their way to the back of the warehouse, Claire's heart was pounding. The building felt different now, oppressive in a way she couldn't explain. She was too deep in this world to turn back, but she couldn't help the gnawing fear in her chest. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back now. Not after everything. She had become part of Aleandro's empire, and whatever came next, she would have to face it head-on, no matter the cost. Massage girl realizes her client is the Mafia boss. Touch it again. Slower. The tension in the air was suffocating as Claire followed Vincent deeper into the warehouse. The dark, empty space seemed to close in around her, the distant sounds of her footsteps echoing off the cold concrete floor. Her mind was racing, but she did her best to stay calm. This was the moment she had been dreading, the point where everything she had been dragged into would come to a head. Aleandro's words echoed in her mind. You will prove yourself. She didn't know what was worse, the task she was about to face or the realization that she was losing herself in Aleandro's world. She had already crossed too many lines to count, and now, there was no turning back. Vincent stopped in front of a heavy metal door, his expression unreadable. He knocked twice, and after a moment, the door creaked open. A man stood on the other side, his face partially hidden in the shadows. Aleandro's girl. The man asked, his voice low and gruff. Claire nodded, swallowing hard. She didn't know what she expected, but the coldness in the man's voice sent a shiver down her spine. The man stepped aside, allowing them to enter. Inside, the room was dimly lit, and Claire could just make out the outlines of a few figures seated at a long table. The atmosphere was thick with distrust, each person watching her closely as she entered. One of them, a tall man with dark sunglasses, gave her a sharp, dismissive glance before turning his attention back to the papers in front of him. This is it? He asked, as if Claire were just another piece of property to be moved around. Yes, Vincent answered, his voice clipped. She'll make the delivery. No mistakes. The tall man raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. You trust her? He asked, the question lingering in the air. Vincent didn't answer immediately, his eyes narrowing. He turned to Claire, giving her a stern look. Make sure you don't screw this up, he said in a voice that left no room for doubt. Claire felt her heart race in her chest, her hands trembling slightly. She had no idea what was in the package she was supposed to deliver, but she knew this wasn't just any simple task. These people, these men, were dangerous, and Aleandro had trusted her with this. She couldn't afford to fail him. You're going to take this to the meeting point, Vincent continued, handing her a small, nondescript bag. You'll be given further instructions once you arrive. No mistakes. Claire nodded, taking the bag from him, trying to steady her shaking hands. She felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, and for a second, she wondered how she got here, how she ended up in a world so far removed from everything she once knew. But there was no time to think about that now. She had a job to do. The tall man with the sunglasses spoke again, his voice dripping with cynicism. Let's see if she can handle this. Claire didn't respond, keeping her focus on the task ahead. She had no room for doubt, no room for hesitation. She couldn't afford to show any weakness. As she turned to leave, she felt the weight of the eyes in the room following her. The door slammed shut behind her, and she was left in the cold silence of the warehouse, the weight of the bag heavy in her hands. The air felt colder now, the atmosphere oppressive. She had no idea who she was meeting or what they wanted, but she knew one thing. Failure wasn't an option. She couldn't let Aleandro down. As she walked back through the dark hallways of the warehouse, her mind raced. She could hear her footsteps echoing, and for the first time, it felt like the walls were closing in around her. She had been in this world for weeks now, but each step she took seemed to pull her deeper into it. The fear, the uncertainty, it was all becoming too much. But she had to keep moving forward. The car waiting for her outside was sleek and black, its tinted windows hiding the driver. She got in without a word, the bag resting in her lap. The driver didn't speak, but Claire could feel his eyes in the rearview mirror, watching her as they drove toward the unknown. The city passed by in a blur, the streets familiar but distant, as if she were leaving her old life behind with each passing block. After what felt like hours, the car finally came to a stop in front of an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. The meeting point. Claire got out, her heart hammering in her chest. She approached the entrance slowly, her breath steadying as she neared the door. She knocked twice, the sound echoing in the silence. The door creaked open, and a man in a dark suit appeared. "You have it?" he asked, his voice low and guarded. Claire nodded, handing him the bag. He took it without a word and disappeared into the shadows. She stood there for a moment, waiting, her heart racing. Then, without a word, the door shut, leaving her standing alone in the cold night. She felt the weight of the moment settle over her. She had done it. She had made the delivery. But as she turned to leave, a sense of dread washed over her. What now? What would Aleandro expect next? She wasn't sure she could handle any more of this world, but she knew one thing. There was no turning back. She was already in too deep. Massage girl realizes her client is the Mafia boss. Touch it again. Slower. Claire stood frozen outside the abandoned building, her breath visible in the cold night air. The door had slammed shut behind her, and for a moment, the weight of the situation hit her with full force. She had done it. She had made the delivery, followed the orders, and now, she was waiting for whatever came next. But what was next? Every step she had taken since meeting Aleandro felt like a step further into a dark, inescapable abyss. A chill ran down her spine as she turned away from the door, unsure of where to go or what to do. As she walked back toward the car, the streetlights above flickered, casting long, eerie shadows across the pavement. The driver, as quiet as ever, didn't speak a word as she climbed into the car. The engine roared to life, and the car began to move, but the silence between them was suffocating. Aleandro had promised her protection, promised her she would learn, but it all felt like a lie now. She had been playing a dangerous game, and the stakes were higher than she ever imagined. What had started as a simple job had turned into something far more complicated and far more dangerous than she could have ever anticipated. The car took her back to the penthouse, but as they drove, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The weight of what she had just done hung over her like a cloud, threatening to break at any moment. When they arrived, Aleandro was waiting for her outside the building. His dark figure stood in contrast to the soft glow of the lights behind him, and as always, his presence commanded attention. Claire stepped out of the car, her legs unsteady, her hands still trembling from the events of the night. Aleandro's gaze swept over her, his eyes softening slightly, but there was no warmth in his expression. "You did well," he said, his voice low. "But this isn't over." Claire felt a lump form in her throat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Aleandro's eyes darkened. "The delivery is only one part of the plan. We've made our move, but there are others who will try to stop us. People who won't let this go without a fight." He stepped closer to her, his presence overwhelming. "This is the life you've chosen now, Claire. There's no turning back." Claire's heart raced as the full weight of his words settled in. She had thought she could control the situation, that if she followed Aleandro's orders, everything would fall into place. But now, she realized how much she had underestimated the complexity of the world she was now a part of. There was no escape. There never had been. "I didn't ask for this," she said, her voice breaking. I never wanted this life. Aleandro reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch firm, yet not unkind. I didn't ask you to want it, he said softly. But you're here, and now you're part of it. There's no going back. And you will be protected, Claire. You'll have everything you need, as long as you stay with me. As long as you stay loyal. Claire wanted to scream, wanted to tell him she couldn't do this anymore, but the words stuck in her throat. What was left to say? She was already too deep, too far gone to make a clean break. She had already crossed the line, and there was no going back. Now, she had become part of his world, whether she wanted to or not. And the worst part was, she was beginning to realize that there was no way out. You're mine now, Aleandro said, his voice low but full of authority. And nothing will change that. Not tonight. Not ever. Claire's stomach twisted as she looked into his eyes, the coldness in them settling in. She wanted to fight, wanted to refuse, but there was no strength left in her. She had lost. She had lost herself, her freedom, and now she belonged to him, whether she liked it or not. As Aleandro turned and walked toward the building, Claire followed him, her mind numb, her body moving on autopilot. The city stretched out before her, its lights blinking in the distance, but it felt as though she was walking in a dream where nothing was real and everything was out of her control. She had been drawn into a world of power and corruption, and now she was stuck in it, bound by invisible chains that tightened with every passing moment. Inside the penthouse, Aleandro didn't speak as they entered. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and Claire stood there, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. She had played her part, but at what cost? What would Aleandro ask of her next? What would she have to sacrifice to stay in his world? She didn't know. But one thing was certain, there was no going back. Not now. Not ever. In the world of dark romance, Claire's life takes a dangerous turn when she is pulled into the seductive and powerful underworld of a mafia boss. Caught between fear and attraction, Claire finds herself becoming more entangled with Aleandro, a powerful figure whose every move seems to pull her deeper into his dangerous game. As she navigates this world of dark romance, Claire must decide whether she will fully embrace the life Aleandro has chosen for her or risk losing herself entirely. From secret meetings to dangerous deliveries, the stakes are high, and trust is a fragile thing in this world of power and corruption. As the tension builds, Claire realizes there is no escaping the pull of dark romance and the life Aleandro demands of her. Will she become the pawn in his world, or will she fight for her own freedom? This dark romance is filled with twists and turns, exploring the dangerous consequences of love, power, and loyalty in a world where there are no easy answers. Claire's journey through the perilous world of dark romance is only beginning, and the choices she makes will determine her fate in this web of danger and intrigue. In the end, Claire must face the chilling truth. She is trapped in the darkness of romance, and there is no turning back.